Could you please introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit more about yourself, how you grew up, and where you grew up?
Sure. I'm Katherine Gruneisen. I go by KG. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which you can probably tell by the way I pronounce Louisville. Lived there all my life up until college. In college, I went to Wake Forest for my freshman year. At the end of the first year, I ended up, long story short, running out of money. I dropped out of school. I moved back to Kentucky. I started working full-time and taking night classes at the University of Louisville to keep up with credits. Mm-hmm. It was a very isolating time in my life, I would say. It was waking up at 6, clocking in at 7, clocking out at 7 p.m., driving to night class, leaving at midnight, waking up again, rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. And kept doing that until I could save up enough money to put myself through the rest of school. Actually moved to Paris during this time with the company and then came back. And then ultimately I transferred to the third school, UVA, which in hindsight, I look back on in my life as a fundamental pivot point that shifted the trajectory of my life. Because of the professors I met there, because I was learning business classes and what finance was and marketing was for the first time, and because of certain people in a community that I think took me seriously in a way that I hadn't taken myself seriously up until that point. It was the first time that people were looking at me and saying, the career that you want, the life of financial stability that you want is possible. Mm-hmm. And you're in the right circles, the right ecosystem to do that. And so transferred 3 times, graduated from UVA, joined AB InBev through their global management training program, which was an amazing experience. It's kind of similar to LinkedIn in a way, it sounds like.
Where you have a cohort.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. 30 graduates from across the country, rotating around the whole business. So my first job out of college was technically working in Georgia in a massive Budweiser brewery. And it was, I never would have thought I would start my career into this intense manufacturing environment. Mm-hmm. But it was the best possible way that I could have because it taught me what it takes to produce consumer goods at scale with consistent quality. And similarly, the other experiences I got rotating across the business just really opened my eyes to what does it take holistically to operate a multinational firm? Mm-hmm. And so I was with the sales reps on their routes, learning how you get those consumer goods to retail shelf and into consumers' hands. I was working in New York and learning about marketing for the first time and falling in love with the alcoholic beverage category. Psychologically, mm-hmm. It's the most fascinating product that you can market. And at the end of it, I ended up joining the craft expansion team, which was a sales team that worked with a lot of the craft breweries that were being bought at the time. This is circa 2017-16. Craft beer was booming. Mm. I think AB bought 8 breweries in a year. It was crazy. And so my job was to go and work with the founders and say, hey, I'm going to help you both scale your business sustainably, but also try to protect you and get out of your way as much as I can, while also trying to hit very real net revenue goals. Kept moving through the business, led teams in sales, e-commerce, digital marketing, for some of the biggest brands, Corona, Stella Artois, and then most recently was leading Budweiser's communication strategy, which was the dream brand to get to work on.
Totally.
I applied to 10 schools. In the end, I got into all 10.
Hell yeah you did. That's my girl.
Which was shocking for me, but exciting. I think it's important context to understand where I started, which was my senior year of college. I studied so much for the GMAT. I gave up so much my senior year. And I went and I took the test. And you may recall, the GMAT is an adaptive test. As you move through it, and in theory get questions correct, it gets harder. My questions became rapidly easier, and it totally got in my head, and I was something's horribly wrong. And I totally flubbed it. I bombed it. Totally froze up. I'd never had something like that academically happen before. And And I walked out of there completely defeated. I didn't even send the score to Stanford. I was like, there's no way. And I moved on with my life. I joined AB InBev. I led my career. And then in hindsight, it was the right move. I don't think I would have gotten a lot of business from business school without having the career to contextualize the lessons. However, it's always stuck in the back of my head. And I remembered I was so frustrated with myself. Like, it's the first thing that I gave up on. And it never went away. It just stayed as an itch in the back of my mind, and I hated that.
The GMAT?
The fact that I'd walked away from it. Yeah. And it felt like this insurmountable thing that ultimately I think corroded my self-esteem a little bit, my self-worth. And in the end, it was what got me over the edge to decide to apply to business school in the first place, because I was like, you know what? Even if I don't go, I want to prove to myself that I can do it. So during COVID, I took the GRE and did well enough to apply. I think some of that legacy trauma of the GMAT stuck with me. I said, who am I, a literal college dropout, to be in a place like Harvard or Wharton or Stanford? And so I applied to a ton of schools, a couple abroad even. And when I started to get the acceptances back, it was truly, like, it was shocking to me. It was. And then I realized I had paid far too much in the application fees in hindsight, but for me, it gave me peace of mind. So that was a little bit of my application approach.
And so which schools did you end up applying to?
Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, MIT, Kellogg, INSEAD, HEC Paris, because I've always wanted to live abroad. And a couple others, basically the top however many, by, classic rank. Yeah.
And how did you end up choosing Stanford? Because these are all such amazing schools with pros and cons, and like going to INSEAD. Well, I know INSEAD's not actually in Paris, but like being abroad would be a whole different experience. And I'm sure, of course, you've considered that as you applied to it.
Yeah. It wasn't until I went for admit weekend. I walked onto Stanford's campus and I immediately felt at home. Not because it's beautiful, it is. But it was the people. And I will never forget, I was in a little icebreaker kind of breakout with 6 of my future classmates. And before me, I had an Olympian, a Navy SEAL, a trained violinist who had performed in front of thousands. I had unbelievable people in my midst, and it made me look around. I was like, I'm Catherine, I'm from Kentucky. Like, to a certain degree, I was like, how on earth did I hack my way in here? But I was like, man, if I'm here, to get to learn from these people is the ultimate privilege. And the lives that they had led were so different from my own. It was immediate. I was like, there's nowhere else. Because while it's a really small class, the composition of people are just second to none.
Totally. Yeah, it's like a feeling of awe that I think even to this point, now that we're in our second year, still doesn't go away. I'm just like, yeah, there's Olympians in our class. It's crazy.
I mean, and rumor had it Shuri was going to be in my class. And I was like, well, if she's coming, then I must.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I will say is, it's not just the accolades of the people. Like, for sure there are Olympians.
True.
But there are a lot of people who have led more traditional careers, whether they were consultants or bankers or teachers. But it is their character and the compassion and empathy and charisma that they have that make them still such of a high caliber in my mind. And I was like, that's the people I want to surround myself with and who I want to learn from and have in my life for the long haul.
I think they do a really good job, and I'm not quite sure how they screen for it in the admissions process, but I would say, like, our classmates are very good people.
Top class.
Yeah. And the dean of admissions, something she said when we had admitted students weekend, is that she doesn't make mistakes. the team does not make mistakes. Whether you're an Olympian, a Navy SEAL, a woman from Kentucky or Long Island, and a top tier violinist, like they do not make mistakes. Mm-hmm. So we're right where we need to be. You're right where you need to be, and there's no way you can mess this up.
I feel very fortunate for that.
Yeah.